Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Celia Bella with the Maharishi Vastu Office for North America. In today's webinar, Dr. Eike Hartmann, the Worldwide Director of Maharishi Vastu Architecture, will discuss the question, what role does consciousness play in Maharishi Vastu architecture? And Jon Lipman, AIA, Director of Maharishi Vastu Architecture for the United States, will connect the role of consciousness to homeowners' experiences and to documented research that describes those effects and their physiological basis. So back to Dr. Eike Hartmann. As a Worldwide Director for Maharishi Vastu Architecture and Planning, in that capacity, he has worked on many hundreds of Maharishi Vastu buildings and communities, and on every continent. For decades, he worked very closely with the greatest of the traditional experts on Vedic architecture in India, and with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, as they identified what constitutes the most holistic, effective, and authentic practice of Vastu, which we now know as Maharishi Vastu architecture. In the 40 years that he worked closely with Maharishi and the many years he has worked with Dr. Tony Nader, Dr. Hartmann has become a world authority on how Vastu is an expression of consciousness, the holistic field at the basis of nature. Dr. Hartmann will now present on this fascinating and profound subject. And because he lives in Europe, and right now it's the middle of the night in Europe, we will play a replay of his Tuesday afternoon presentation on this topic. And then Jon Lipman and the rest of us will continue live to answer your questions.
Thank you for the nice introduction. It is a great joy to participate in your ongoing webinars. The general theme of this year at our university is related to finding patterns of consciousness in all fields of knowledge, and we thought to use the current session of our Vastu webinars to redefine Vedic architecture, Maharishi Vastu, as the architecture of consciousness, or the other way, consciousness-based architecture. Now, consciousness is the most fundamental level of life. If we did not have consciousness, we could not know or do anything. There could be many ways of looking at consciousness, from the angle of neuroscience, analyzing where consciousness is located in the brain, or from the angle of physics and quantum physics, going into abstraction, beyond the finest level of matter into the quantum field, or from the angle of philosophy, defining consciousness as the simplest state of awareness. The latest work, covering the entire range of scientific and scholarly investigation, is the best-selling book by Dr. Tony Nader, One Unbounded Ocean of Consciousness, which describes reality as one unified holistic system of the physical and the non-physical together, where everything is resonating and integrated in one grand unification of nature and natural law. Dr. Nader comes to the conclusion that consciousness is all that there is. Everything is made of consciousness. In the following, we will explain the structures of consciousness in the framework of Vedic architecture, and finally evaluate the effect of harmonious living and working in Vastu buildings. So now I'll share my screen and go for that. This is our title slide. In our talk today, we will take this viewpoint of consciousness and look at it from the angle of structural dynamics and see how these structures are connected and resonate with the principles of Vedic architecture. We will do this in 3 parts. One is the structure of the ever-expanding universe. 2 is the threefold structure of knowledge. And 3, symmetry and order in space. First of all, the cosmic structure of the galactic universe is the expressed full value of manifest consciousness. It is composed of galaxies. They all have a center point of attraction, supposed to be a black hole. In this way, every galaxy has a center point that unifies and upholds its structure. Within the galaxy, there are clouds and star fields with suns and solar system. Each solar system is centered on its own sun, with planets in orbit revolving all around. Then there are the planets, the planetary structure, in this case our planet Earth, which has its central axis, connecting the North to the South Pole with a spin rotating towards the east. And the specialty of the east is that it is the direction of the rising sun. Now, the strongest influence of natural law comes from the sun. As it rises in the east and sets in the west, it generates different energies. East is where the energy of the day is rising. It is total plus. Now west is the opposite, where the energy of the day is sinking. The sun is going down, causing all kinds of lack of energy, lack of money, lack of creativity, etc. North again is plus. It is growth, like the full moon. And south again is the opposite of north, inviting destruction, accidents, and even death. From this, we can derive the principle of polarity of the directions in terms of quality and function. Now we have to distinguish between 2 types of orientation. One is with reference to the sun, the rising sun, and the other one with reference to the structure of the earth itself, which is composed of north and south poles and the parallels to the equator. This distinction between orientation and alignment is important and needs to be explained. In the universe, all structures are round, huge balls hanging in space, whereas when we build on the surface of the earth, we build in terms of square or rectangular structures because buildings have to align to the structure of the planet, according to the long lines connecting the poles and those that are parallel to the equator. These 2 types of lines intersect, always at right angles, thus creating squares or rectangles on the surface of the globe, which is the source of vast alignment of roads and buildings. Now this diagram shows that from 4 possible directions, only 2 are considered having a positive effect. The east is the most auspicious and the north the second best direction for the entrance of a house, for a building to face. Eastern facade means that the face of the building is on the eastern side. Therefore, it clearly says in the Vastu textbook of Manasa that due east should be preferred for the buildings of those who desire enlightenment, and we all do. According to Maharishi Vastu, any human artifact should be resonating with the planetary and the cosmic structure, so that individual life is at all times connected with cosmic life. This is why Vedic architecture is always called architecture in harmony with natural law. And so far, we have shown that there are different structures of nature, and nature is a perfect expression of consciousness. Some structures are more unbounded and dynamic, others are finer states, and finally there is the finest immaterial quantum state, and going beyond, transcending the finest level, we reach the non-expressed silent level of pure consciousness. This very basic primordial structure is called point and infinity. It is continuously oscillating back and forth. Seen from above, it is a structure like this. In Vedic science, this is often used to describe the full range of the dynamics of consciousness from the smallest to the largest level and back. It is also used to explain the process of transcending, as it takes the mind from active awareness to finer and finer levels until the finest level is reached and transcended, so that the mind dives into the ocean of pure consciousness. Now see the same conceptual diagram of point and infinity seen from the side, showing the arrow going down in the direction of refinement. The only thing is that on the level of the point value, the point is shown as a flat line, a straight line, without any fluctuation, indicating the unmanifest unified state, which we call the unified field of all possibilities. From this unified field, all the manifest phenomena in nature arise, as indicated by the upward stroke, the arrow, from unmanifest to manifest levels of life. In our exercise today, we want to show how the entire field of architecture arises from this very same unified field. Expanding from the primordial level of unified time and space, we could derive the three basic principles of Vedic architecture. One is the principle of orientation, the other the principle of placement, and both with reference to proportions and symmetry. Further, we are proceeding from the three basic principles into the different phases of architecture planning and construction. As it says here, concept phase, planning phase, construction phase, and finally arriving at the finished building. The whole thing is called a unified field chart, and the faculty of MIU is using such charts as teaching tools relating pure consciousness to each field of knowledge, physics, chemistry, physiology, and in this case architecture, to their practical application in modern society. On the left side of this unified field chart is always depicted the process of transcending, because all our students are meditating and gaining the experience of cultivating the seed of total knowledge in their brain, whereas all Vedic architects use also the TM technique to develop the necessary qualification of an unbounded holistic Vedic consciousness. You cannot practice Vedic architecture without Vedic consciousness. Now comes part 2, which is in terms of the threefold structure of knowledge, because knowledge in itself has a structure too. In this knowledge system, let us first explain the term Stapatya Ved. It is derived from the word stapan, to establish, and Veda, which means knowledge, holistic knowledge of natural law. Therefore, Stapatya Veda, by definition, is the Vedic science of architecture, and the other term often used, Vastu, is the Vedic technology of construction. Science and technology have to go hand in hand to make a complete system. Now, more precisely, Stapatya Ved is Veda, but classified as Upaveda. The Upavedas specifically deal with optimizing human living conditions on the practical level and are focused on creating a specific effect each time. Now, the effect produced by Stapatya Veda is called Vastu Shanti. It means peaceful, harmonious living. The word Shanti simply means peace. Everyone living in a Vastu home is reporting the same soothing benefits. Amongst other studies, Dr. Jon Lipman has been showing you the remarkable results of our recent Quality of Life survey and other published research, which demonstrate that Maharishi Vastu is a real and verified technology of life and practical living. According to Vedic science, knowledge has a structure. Any mature knowledge or knowledge system is based on the same threefold structure. This is because knowledge is structured in consciousness. For example, in order to gain knowledge, there has to be an observer, an object of observation, and a process of observation, as explained in this diagram of someone looking at a flower. Now, these three are called the triple of knowledge and are in a state of continuous interaction and fluctuation as we are processing thoughts and experiences all the time. As we had just explained, the term Veda means knowledge. Therefore, it is also structured in terms of the same triple of knower, known, and knowledge. You see that in this diagram, the different aspects of Vedic literature are organized in three streams of knowledge, according to the same triple. From the unified value of Rig Veda on the top, in three streams of knowledge, these three channels flow. This is how Maharishi has organized the entire field of Veda and Vedic science, in which we now want to locate Stapatya Veda. Now, vertically, this whole field is grouped into 6 different levels, and important for us is the position of Stapatya Veda in the group of the Upaveda. Upaveda is the applied value of the Veda, applied to human life on earth. And the unified value of Upaveda is Ayurveda, you all know. We could say that Vedic architecture is the architecture of Ayurveda, and most people know about Ayurveda for its many benefits for natural and balanced health. As it says in the main textbook of Ayurveda, that one should not live even one day in a house that is not according to Vastu. Therefore, Vedic architecture can also be understood in terms of wellness and healthy living. Wherever we are, we have to live somewhere, and that dwelling place has to be built according to Vedic design for maximum health, wealth, and happiness, exactly as the textbooks of Ayurveda would proclaim. To summarize, Maharishi says, because the individual is cosmic, everything about individual life should be in full harmony with cosmic life. And now part 3, symmetry and order in outer and inner space. Maharishi says that Vastu is a great power in nature, and he defined it as that intelligence of natural law which balances the individual structure with the cosmic structure. To make this clear to everyone, he further explained, suppose there is one star, and then another star, and in between these two stars there is a neutral point where the influence from one star is neutralized by the influence of the other star. It is the balancing point, and it is precisely this balancing point which is the actual seat of the power of Vastu. The central balancing point, even though being neutral and devoid or empty of anything, is a field of potential dynamism of consciousness. On one hand, it is dynamic in its expressed or manifest state, while it is completely silent in its unified, unmanifest state. So there is silence and there is dynamism. It is a fundamental principle of nature. Because it is a fundamental structure, we find it everywhere. In fact, every holistic structure of natural law has such a center point of balance that unifies and upholds its structure in perfect harmony. That point of wholeness, in technical language, is called Brahmastan, the point of totality. We may want to remember it as a specific term that is used often in Vedic architecture. For example, every atom is a structure of consciousness. Every flower has a center point, and as we had shown in the beginning, every solar system and every galaxy has such a central point of wholeness, a Brahmastan, which upholds and balances the structure. Whenever we locate this point of unity and wholeness, it becomes the fountainhead of creative intelligence, the quantum field of all possibilities. It could be called the ultimate structure of natural law, and we will be coming back to it all the time because every Vastu structure is designed with reference to its center point. In the Vastu scripture it says, "He who knows the secret of the point of consciousness, is called a master of Vastu architecture and a knower of reality." Now the question, how do these abstract knowledge principles translate into Vedic architecture to produce ideal Vastu buildings? In every Vastu structure, the same center point is observed. It is defined by the intersection of the center lines and becomes the source of symmetry in Maharishi Vastu. There is central symmetry when looking at the ground plan, and there is lateral symmetry when looking at the elevation. And accordingly, rooms and their functions are placed to resonate with the influence and qualities of the different directions. This is how, from the center point of wholeness, the point value of consciousness, the building process begins. With reference to its source, the Vedic architect composes the building horizontally and vertically as laid out on the site plan. Whatever is the size or type of the Vastu plan, either of an individual building or a full city plan, the same basic principles are applied. We are eternally grateful to Maharishi for bringing this knowledge back to light. He basically took the ancient scriptures off the bookshelves, dusted them off and gave them back to the world for the sole purpose of creating ideal life on earth, the best possible living conditions, which we call heaven on earth. Thank you, and thank you for your patience, and thank you very much. So, we have covered in a glimpse the structural dynamics of architecture from the physical to its source in the non-physical, and in the field of structured knowledge from total abstraction in the quantum field to practical application on the building site. We also explained the process of transcending, how to take a dive into the ocean of consciousness, the source of all creativity. We have located the fundamentals of architecture in the unified field of all the laws of nature. Vibrating within itself, the unified field gives rise to the diversity of the material universe, which in itself is structured in patterns of consciousness. We identified some of these patterns and showed that they resonate with the basic principles of Vedic architecture, like orientation, symmetry, function, and placement. The resulting buildings are coherent, creating homes and developments that are radiating wholeness, health, harmony, and happiness. These effects are verified by quite a number of published scientific studies, and we are excited to hear now from Dr. Jon Lipman, summarizing the research as ultimate proof of the benefits of balanced Vastu life and living. So Jon, now back to you, and please take it from here. Thank you.
Let us now think about how these principles are demonstrated in the experiences of people who live in Vastu homes. And I'll mainly focus on not the quality of people's experiences, but on what has been measured to date in medical research, some of it done on some of the key elements of Vastu, and some of it done, in fact, on Maharishi Vastu buildings. And so let's take a look at some data. Dr. Hartmann spoke about right orientation, about placement, and about symmetry. And the research that's been conducted to date has been to help us to understand what the effects are of right orientation. So we'll focus primarily on that. First of all, what we have learned from Dr. Hartmann is that there is something very special about east, about the orientation to the east, and that north is also very good and south is the worst. So what do we actually find in people's brains and in their functioning when they're facing the different cardinal directions? In a wonderful piece of research that was published last March in a peer-reviewed medical journal, it was discovered that when people are engaged in a focused activity and they do the same activity facing east and west and north and south randomly in each of the four directions, that they actually complete the task fastest when they're facing east, which is what this bar shows. East is the shortest bar, and that means that they finish the task faster, 300 seconds in this case, a little slower when they were facing north, quite a bit slower when they were facing west, and much slower when they were facing south. The difference between under 300 seconds and about 450 seconds is quite huge. And so if we think about the difference in our efficiency at doing our work, at learning information when we're studying, we really want to make sure that we take advantage of this ancient knowledge of the right directions to face. But there was more that came out on this study, because the researchers also, as you see in the photograph on the right, were taking EEG readings of the subjects as they were facing the directions. And what that means is that with the skull cap, with electrodes coming from it, they were measuring activity, electrical activity, in 12 or 16 different spots on the skull. And what they are picking up is the activity of the prefrontal cortex, which is the executive of the brain. And what has been found is that there's a quality of coherence. Normally, if you measure the activity of the brain in all the different areas, those waves of activity are completely seem random relative to each other. No coherence, not in phase with each other at all. But the more that they are in phase, that is, the more that the brain is working globally as one unit, the greater the score on IQ tests, the greater the score on creativity tests, the greater that one does in a test of moral reasoning. And so in one single measurement, coherence seems to reveal how well our mind is working. Now, why this is pertinent is because the findings in this study were, if we look on the bottom chart and we look in this area surrounded by the rounded rectangle, we're looking at two sets of brain waves, beta 2 and gamma, which are the portions of the brainwave spectrum that are applied in focused tasks. And what we found, and the data is too small for you to really read, but I'll tell you, the black bar again is for people facing east under beta, and here under gamma, and then north, west, and south. What you can see is that the lines get shorter and shorter. And again, meaning that there is the most brain coherence when the subjects were facing east, a little less when facing north, a little less when facing west, and least when facing south. And so we have validation from brain research that the value of right orientation that Dr. Hartmann was just connecting to the cosmic structure is very, very real. We also spend a lot of our day lying down, sleeping, usually sleeping. And so right orientation surely has an impact upon us when we are sleeping. And indeed, 3 studies that I found doing a review of the literature indicated that mental health and various markers of physical health, including heartbeat, pulse rate, and blood pressure, and others, are best if we sleep or we lie prone, lying with our head, that is the top of the head, to the east or to the south, and are worst when we lie with the top of the head at the west or north sides of the bed. And this is precisely as recommended in the ancient texts of Vastu. And so this is the reason why when we build buildings, we make sure to lay them out so that our desks and our beds can face the right directions, ideally east. And in that way, we function the best. So orientation, which Dr. Hartmann described in the most abstract of terms, becomes very, very practical for us. He also talked about the effect of the orientation of buildings. And as you'll remember, and my diagram is not oriented the same way that Dr. Hartmann's was, and mine east is to the right, north is to the top. The two with the green goods are the directions that the Vedic literature says are the ideal directions for buildings to face. And you'll remember he said that south-facing buildings have all negative influences, he said, even an influence of death. And so it turns out that 3 studies that have all been through peer review and published in the literature show that those people who live in south-facing houses describe themselves in a questionnaire as being less prosperous than the others. When they take a mental health exam, they score more poorly than everyone else. And lo and behold, in an astonishing study, people who live in south-facing houses get burglarized 75% more often than people living in houses facing other directions. So this value of orientation is very real, not only for the effect of the subject, but also for the effect of the built environment that we're living in. Now, related also to orientation, as you'll remember from Dr. Hartmann, is that east is the direction of the rising sun, that the rising sun is the representative of natural law affecting life on Earth, and that we want to connect ourselves with that. Now, one way that we can is have a building that has plenty of windows on the east side so that that eastern influence penetrates the house. Now, is there any medical research that validates that assertion in Maharishi Vastu? And the answer is that there are 5 different studies that I have found that each correlate or associate some better quality of health with people who are getting east light or morning light in comparison with people who are exposed to west or afternoon light. They recover from being treated for bipolar disorder much more quickly and are released from treatment from hospitals. They have a more healthful body mass index. They probably have a reduction in the risk of getting skin cancer. They are less likely to suffer from seasonal affective disorder and related depression. And finally, their score on a mental health exam tends to be higher. So the value of east light is very real, very measurable. However, these are just isolated elements that are a part of Maharishi Vastu. And the system is a holistic system, and we would expect that there would be much greater, much broader effects of actually living in a Maharishi Vastu house that has right orientation, right placement of rooms, and right proportions. And indeed, we find quite remarkable benefits. And so if we look in more depth at that survey that Dr. Hartmann referred to, which was done of between 140 and 160 families around the world who live in Maharishi Vastu, what we found is that about 85% reported that they suffer less stress since they've lived in Vastu. About 80% believe they have better mental health, 70% better physical health. And an example of what this translates to in real life is a quote that our son's ability to concentrate on projects is much greater. He feels he wants to accomplish whatever he needs to do, and he doesn't feel distracted. And in quality of life, about 90% of the people who have moved into Vastu feel that it has improved their overall quality of life, including in the areas of family relations and their abilities to fulfill goals. And as an example of improved quality of life, here's an example. A person who lives in this beautiful home wrote, "I sleep better, I feel more at home, the space feels alive. I'm more creative and fulfilled being there. People who have visited are blown away by the way it feels there." This is a common reaction to visiting Maharishi Vastu houses, whether they are as glorious physically as this or whether they're much more modest. And another quote, "Our relationship and lives seem to be happier and more peaceful." And finally, success, our outward expression in the world. 85% of people who live in Vastu have reported that they have experienced greater success since they have lived in Vastu overall. And these findings, by the way, were greater among people who had been living in Vastu for longer periods of time. And so these benefits, it seems, accrue as we stay in Vastu. An example about success: since moving into this Vastu office building, my coworkers are more cooperative, more enthusiastic, and do not seem overwhelmed by their problems. Personalities have changed. It's easier to work here, to be more productive and happier. For me, this building has changed the definition of work. And finally, in the supreme area of life, our spiritual development, our growth towards enlightenment, 85% of the people who live in Maharishi Vastu reported that their experiences of pure spiritual growth seem to have increased since they moved into Vastu, and slightly less numbers found greater meaning in life and greater support of nature, that is, good luck, which are all measurements of living with our consciousness more aligned with the consciousness that organizes all of nature in just exactly the way that Dr. Hartmann described in kind of abstract terms in his presentation. It comes right down to this very real, measurable experience of greater spiritual development. Another experience: this home is a totally safe, secure refuge, a sanctuary of purity and stillness and happiness. I feel that my home protects me, not only when I'm in it, but even when I'm away from it. I feel nourished by my house, supported by my house, cared for by my house. And so the overall set of areas in life which are understood to be improved by living in Vastu: improved physical and mental health, greater happiness, family harmony, success, and growth to enlightenment, are all measurable, they're all real, and all can be understood as a byproduct of this cosmic way of aligning individual intelligence with cosmic intelligence, using the principles of nature's own architecture, as Dr. Hartmann has presented to you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jon. This was wonderful. And if I may add something, we should always remember that these effects, they are accumulative. So whenever you showed, sometimes the bar was only a little bit, bigger or smaller. The differences were not so pronounced. But if you think that this is every day you go from plus to plus to plus to plus when you're in harmony with nature. And the other way is when you're in violation of natural law. Every day you add minus to minus to minus to minus, and usually one lives many years in the same house. So this accumulative effect is enormous, and maybe in the next time when you bring it out in your summaries, you can, refer to the accumulative effect of Vastu living or non-Vastu living.
Beautiful. And in fact, that was even assessed in the survey, which discovered, when it compared the experiences of people who had been living in Maharishi Vastu homes for more than 3 years to those who had been living in them for less than 3 years, that the first group, the group living in Vastu longer, was having better experiences. So this is exactly the measurement of what you said.
Great, beautiful. Very nice talk. We always enjoy when you bring out the scientific research, because that's the proof of the pudding. Otherwise we can talk and say nice things and show fantastic pictures or whatever, and it doesn't mean anything unless you come up with your verification. So thank you, it was great.
If the entrance to a piece of land or lot is from the south, can the ill effects be negated by creating a driveway that wraps around to the east direction so the main door of the house is facing east?
So the most important thing is what you do on the land. So first thing is that you observe the alignment and the orientation as we had explained. And that you do, first you have the Vastu compound in which the house is located. So if that is properly done, then it doesn't matter so much if you have to drive onto the property, onto the remaining land where you can park your car and whatever. If you have to drive on it because the road is in the southern side, what can you do? So that doesn't matter, because the properly aligned Vastu compound and the properly aligned Vastu building is kind of rectifying. It would be nice if you could come in from the east, but it is no harm if you come from any other direction, because you cannot help it.
And Dr. Hartmann, does that mean that when we can talk about using the word compound, that means anything within the Vastu perimeter fence?
Yeah, that's what it means. There is a fence around it, which is marking the size and the shape of it. It has a gate, and then inside of that is the Vastu building. There are two things that have to be aligned.
Right. And some Vastu texts and scholars suggest that the best place for the entrance into the plot of land is in the fourth box from the northeast corner in the 9-box grid. How does one reconcile their point of view with Maharishi Vastu's emphasis on entrance in the 5th or middle box on the east?
Well, it's basically the same. There are different ways of counting, because you can have a 9x9 pada or an 8x8 pada. The main thing is that the entrance is slightly shifted towards the north, and that is always observed.
Right. And Maharishi Vastu also observes that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yes, great. This question, I think you partially answered it, Dr. Hartmann, but maybe there's something more you'd like to bring out about it. Can you speak about the relation between consciousness and the sun, the most influential body in the solar system, by explaining the spherical harmonics equation and global grid law?
The spherical harmonics, this time we did not go into details, but it basically is the same, that the vibration of a planetary body that goes from north to south, and according to the spin, that produces a kind of standing waves which are corresponding to the grid lines on the surface of the longitudes and latitudes. So we have also explained the longitudes and latitudes without going into the very specific and kind of complicated to understand spherical harmonics. Because you see them, when you connect the North Pole to the South Pole, these are the longitudes, and then when you add these parallels that are parallel to the equator, that makes the same grid. So the main thing is that we align buildings, and I'm using the word alignment, it's not orientation, it's alignment, because this grid is fixed. Whereas the sun, the earth is wobbling a bit, so the sun is not always rising in due east. It varies, it goes from northeast to direct east and then to southeast. So we cannot really say we align exactly to the rising sun, because that is different every day. So the alignment which is fixed are those lines that are crisscrossing, the earth, giving the structure of the earth. The earth is fixed. The sun is not.
What is needed to make the whole world Vastu?
Build. We keep building, we keep talking to developers, we keep talking to governments, and when the time is right, then the big wave is happening. And maybe this is the time now, because we start talking about consciousness, which everybody understands, everybody has consciousness. So all these effects that we are relating They're based to our, to our own life. Consciousness is our own life. It's everywhere. The whole thing is an ocean of consciousness. So whatever we build has to be also resonating with that.
So our friend Tatsuhiko in Japan asks, can you speak about the relation between consciousness, total knowledge, and Vastu architecture?
Hello, Tatsuhiko. It's good to know that you're connected with us and you're so faithful. You have built Vastu. You have really helped to transform Japan, and you are very loyal and always listen to our broadcasts. And I'm sure that you are giving lectures and spreading the knowledge of Vastu yourself in Japan. You asked a very kind of cosmic question, and I'm going to ask Celia to say that question a second time so we can really give it a proper answer.
Yes, it is a very profound question. Can you speak about the relation between consciousness, total knowledge, and Vastu architecture?
The best answer that I could give would be to spend 30 minutes and repeat what Dr. Hartmann said, because he did it very eloquently. But what I think I would try to say to you in just a couple of minutes is that total knowledge is the organizing intelligence that is at the level of Vedic, at the level of consciousness that is unmanifest, which then is expressed in all of reality. And it expresses itself through the structures of the physical manifestations of consciousness. And so total knowledge, normally we think of, is expressed through our own brains. However, we, our physiologies, inhabit an environment, a built environment, which is just a little addition on the surface of our natural environment, which is the planet. And so if that built environment can itself, as is the planet and as is our own physiology and as is our brain, be a perfect expression of total knowledge, of consciousness, as it is when it's built using the technology of Maharishi Vastu in the ways that Dr. Hartmann described, then it becomes transparent to the flow of our consciousness. And you might remember one of Dr. Hartmann's slides, which showed the individual and the earth and the cosmos, and maybe the first one was the building. And when the building is completely aligned with natural law, then it, as I said, it becomes transparent to the flow of our own consciousness, and our individual intelligence has no inhibition from the environment to being perfectly aligned with cosmic intelligence. And so that, I think, is maybe a 2-minute version of an answer to Tatsuhiko's wonderful question.
Nice question, and very good answer in a short period of time. What can a person do to ameliorate the negative effects of a south-facing home other than move? Also, would an L-shaped home be measured as a square in order to locate the Brahmastan?
In answer to the first question, the only way to undo the effect of living in a south-facing house is to not live in a south-facing house. The answer is implied in the question. I will say that if there are east and or north entrances to the house, and you close up and nobody uses the south entrance, and you come and go from the east or from the north, that will ameliorate the southern influence substantially. But consider that only to be a temporary solution. And what is the second question?
Would an L-shaped home be measured as a square in order to locate the Brahmastan?
In an existing house, there usually is not a Brahmastan. The Brahmastan is a pattern of natural law around which the house is itself designed. If we are talking about overlaying patterns of nature's architecture onto an existing house, there's not such reality to that. I could give you a very specific answer for a specific house, looking at a roof plan or a floor plan. But to give you a general answer to this question is to create the suggestion that we can overlay pattern after pattern of Vastu onto a non-Vastu house, and then think of it as being a Vastu house, which is not an accurate conclusion. I
think actually he was asking if you had a Vastu house, although he didn't write it, if you had a Vastu house and it was L-shaped, would the house be measured in order as a square in order to locate the Brahmastan?
Not exactly, no. There is in fact a particular way that we do locate the Brahmastan in an L-shaped house. So it is done, but I would do that in a diagram referring to a specific house. I also want to say that I didn't mean to sound overly harsh a second ago. If we are stuck for now in a non-Vastu house, steps that we can take, we should take, but that has to do with right orientation, with coming and going from the house from the right directions, and from sleeping and working and eating facing the right directions. Those are the key things that we want to get right wherever we live.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions about sleep. In sleeping, is it that the head should be at the eastern end of the bed?
Yes, what I like to say is pillow at the east end of the bed is what we most recommend, or pillow at the south end of the bed.
And then another one about sleep. Why is sleeping with the head to the south recommended for chronic health problems when from the diagram east is best?
Because the Vedic literature describes one specific influence from sleeping with head to the south, which is that it promotes longevity. And if we are ill, elderly, or frail, any influence of longevity will be very important for us. And that's why in those cases, we specifically recommend sleeping with head to the south. For everybody else, it's fine to sleep with head to the south, but the most holistic influence, the influence of growth to enlightenment, is gained from sleeping with head to the east.
Thank you. Is there any difference in living in a two-story Vastu house and just a single level Vastu house? Is one more ideal than the other?
Both are completely ideal.
Is the building always placed in the center of the plot?
No. It's usually placed within, by plot, if we mean the parcel of land that the owner owns, which is, of course, what the word plot normally means. The house may be placed according to a whole series of functional and governmental requirements. There is, if the plot is large enough, there is a certain amount of flexibility. If the plot is very large, very, very large, then there is a very specific process which is described in the Vedic literature that we can use to locate the house. But that does not apply to the traditional urban or suburban lot.
Would you please explain how water affects inside a house, a pool or a fountain, for example?
A way that we can think about the effect of water is that it magnifies the solar influence. We could even think, and I don't want to say that this is literally the case, but it helps us to understand it. If there is a water body to the east or to the north of a house, say to the east, then that rising sun rays, some will bounce off of the surface of water towards the house. And so the house is saturated by more east energy. That's a way of thinking about it. There's also a nourishing influence from the north. So by extension, we can use that as a way of thinking about why water to the east or to the north are nourishing.
Good. You answered the second part of the question, which is where should we place pools and fountains?
Good.
If I was to build a side-by-side duplex according to Vastu, and the duplex faced east, could I choose to live in the southeast side?
Well, if you're building a duplex facing east, then there's a south unit and a north unit. But I don't know exactly what they mean by southeast.
I think she meant a south unit that's facing east.
That is what we would recommend to the owner of the duplex, yes.
So she could live in either one, south or north unit?
She could, but if she's the owner of both of them, then we would recommend that she live in the south unit. But if she's selling the other one, then either one is equally good.
How essential is the cupola or skylight at the top of a Maharishi Vastu house? It says at the top of an otherwise good Maharishi Vastu house or building that has all other Maharishi Sthapati features, but there is no opening at the top.
There's a slight difference between a cupola and a skylight. A skylight is letting light into the house through the roof. A cupola is a small structure on the top of the roof, which often do have windows, which also let light in. It is absolutely a pattern, an ideal pattern, that the Brahmastan has a connection to the cosmos, and so that there is some way for light to enter a building above the Brahmastan through a skylight or a cupola, through a clear story. And so that's one of the patterns. It's not one of the absolute most core patterns. Dr. Hartmann talked about orientation, placement, and proportion and symmetry. It's not one of those, but there are many elements that compose the structure of a Vastu building, and this is one of them. So not necessary, but a very good thing.
Can you describe how to orient cooking and eating areas, please?
If you go to our website, maharishivastu.org, and you go to About, and you click on, maybe it's called Read a Textbook on Maharishi Vastu, and you click through it, it's about 60 pages. You'll find that on one of the pages is a diagram that shows the ideal locations for some of the major functions in a house, so that those functions, as Dr. Hartmann described, are supported by the appropriate differing quality of the sun's energy. In the southeast is the primary of two locations where Agni is lively. Agni is the quality of transformation. It is best for our health, as we understand through Ayurveda, that we digest our food completely, which means that the process of transformation or the quality of Agni is strong. And if food is cooked in that southeast area where Agni resides, then the food which is cooked, as long as it's eaten relatively soon after it was cooked, will have more Agni in it and therefore can be digested most completely, and our health will be better. And so the first of two prime locations for kitchens is in the Southeast. Now, that's not talking about orientation, that's talking about placement, but I think that maybe was really the question.
Very good. And that's a great reference for people to know about our website, that they can go to our website for further information. Well, I think that is it, Jon. I think you did it. I think that covered all the main questions. That was a really fascinating dive into the foundational role of consciousness in Maharishi Vastu architecture. You're invited to check the posts on our Facebook and Instagram pages. The page is named Maharishi Vastu. If you have a question that didn't get answered today, you may email us through the contact form on our website, maharishivastu.org, and we'll get back to you. Thank you for your interest in Maharishi Vastu architecture, which enhances peace and happiness in life. Goodbye for now.